The superstitious, and there are many of them in China, believe that huge natural catastrophes are always precursors of great change. What must they be thinking? A disastrous earthquake, China about to host its first Olympic Games, and the entire world is watching. Something strikingly similar happened before, although there were no outsiders in China to record the event and very few pictures remain. In late July of 1976, there was an even more catastrophic earthquake in China. More than 250,000 people died. The Olympic Games were underway in Montreal, and China played no part in them whatsoever. In those waning days of the Cultural Revolution, China refused almost all contact with the outside world. Mao Zedong lay on his deathbed, and great changes were about to take place. Memories fade. Even in China, people under the age of 40 have no personal recollection of the Cultural Revolution. Years when the thoughts of Chairman Mao were memorized and treasured as though they were biblical revelations. Gems like this. It is necessary for young intellectuals to live and work in the countryside and to be re-educated by the poor farmers. If some German entrepreneur had opened a beer garden on the outskirts of Munich, dressed an actor up in an old SS uniform, and then had him read excerpts from Hitler's Mein Kampf into a microphone, while a couple of hundred nostalgic Germans chowed down on bratwurst and sauerbraten, if that had happened, well, it wouldn't. It couldn't. But this cheerful horde of Chinese diners is embarking on a comparable evening of entertainment. After dinner and a bracing quantity of adult beverages, this crowd of nostalgia buffs will spend the next couple of hours on hard wooden benches recalling the good old days of the Cultural Revolution. This strutting, stylized, fist-pumping, flag-waving propaganda production was the only kind of entertainment permitted in China from the mid-60s to the mid-70s. The Chinese had no choices. All the while, anyone even remotely suspected of harboring personal ambitions or dreams of prosperity was harassed and tormented, forced to wear dunce caps, driven out into the poorest, most remote corners of China. Creative thinking, ambition of any kind, was stifled, smothered. And while this dinner theater production clearly does seem to elicit some pangs of nostalgia among older members of the audience, the younger people think it's a hoot. To many Chinese these days, the Cultural Revolution is better mocked than too carefully remembered. You may back then have thought about getting rich, but you didn't dare say it out loud. Now, it's all anybody talks about. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Everyone's in competition with everybody else. The woman sitting to my immediate right, Madame He Yongzhi, is one of the top dogs in Chongqing's booming economy. Rich beyond her own wildest dreams, yet still a little nostalgic for the old days.
In those days, people's thinking was very simple and humble, too. People thought less than they do now in these complicated times. Yes, we knew very little, but that doesn't mean our lives were worse.
You can't miss Madame He's restaurant-hotel complex. It dominates the skyline of this boom town, carved into a cliff overlooking the Jialing River. Like Chongqing itself, it's not subtle. This city is all about big investment, heavy manufacturing, massive construction. Like Madame He's entertainment complex, it's all about big dreams and instant fortunes.
I am proud of being rich. I made my money through hard work. And now that I have it, I can help others become rich too.
In Mingshan, capitalism personified. He's an automobile magnate. He endured hard labor, exile to the countryside, and starvation rations during the Cultural Revolution. But when I mentioned that bizarre dinner show to him, even he seems to get a little misty-eyed. It's almost as though they miss it, as though they're nostalgic for it. Explain that to me.
First of all, life in the countryside in the old days was very hard. But at the same time, it gave us a good life experience. Secondly, today's global competition is so fierce and came so fast, it made all of us, including myself, feel such heavy pressure. When they remember the old days, although life was very harsh, it was free. They used to dance and sing all the time. With the pressure you get today, you realize life in the old days was very simple. That is why some people even cry during that show.
The best of times, the worst of times. If you've got money, you can buy almost anything. Drugs, women, just be discreet. If you're poor, there are more chances to make money than anyone can remember. It's not perfect, but it's better than before. And who's making it possible? The government. Political freedom, the right to dissent, freedom for Tibet. There are lines you don't cross. Talk about anything you like, just don't get political. Listen to the music. The singer, she's adopted a Western name, Bethany, is the featured performer here at the Cotton Club. Speaks good English, but when the conversation gets complicated, she'll answer in Chinese. What is different in the Chinese social structure, in the morality, in a city like Chongqing that is growing so quickly?
Like any city that develops quickly, people are more or less lost in the transition. People become very shallow and curious about anything from the outside, and they often get confused. Take drugs, for example. Whenever there is a demand, there will be a supply. You can get whatever you want as long as you have money. Some rich men don't have time to look for real love, and still they need girls, so they come pick them up like fast food. And the pretty girls want a shortcut to get rich. This is why China has so many problems. Traditionally, homosexuality was illegal, but now it's not difficult for many people to accept such a thing.
Open homosexuality in China? Oh, yes. And some highly popular gay clubs where it's celebrated by men who say they don't think they will be gay forever. We'll show you. When night falls, almost every public square in Chongqing takes on a little magic. The music is piped in over speakers, and because it's free, which is the only price that everyone can afford, and because there's very little land available for any other kind of recreation, thousands of people, mostly middle-aged women, come to these squares and dance. It is at about this time that Ouyang begins to prepare for work. Ouyang is a drag performer.
When I had my first boyfriend, my father asked me, "Why do you have such a special relationship with that boy?" Of course, he meant gay relationship. My father said if this is an illness, we will find a doctor to cure it. But if this is what you are, that's okay.
The Wu Yi Club is hardly the kind of place you expect to find in China's heartland. The club flourishes in the very heart of town and is packed every night with gays and lesbians and a few curious straights. It's pretty tame stuff for the most part, but for the past 60 years, China's been a rigidly puritanical country. The mere fact that this club is permitted to exist openly without police interference is almost certainly due to regular payoffs, but it's also a mark of China's changing values.
When the bar started, it was difficult. There was a lot of pressure from the cultural inspectors and the police, because this type of gay gathering was illegal, and the officials judged our drag show to be dirty and pornographic. But society has become more and more tolerant towards the gay community as a result of AIDS awareness.
AIDS in China is no longer perceived as only a gay disease, and some forms of treatment are becoming increasingly available. Anything, though, that even smacks of political expression crosses the line. Is there ever anything like a gay pride parade in Chongqing?
So far in China, in Chongqing and other cities, there is no gay pride parade. Society has not reached the level where gay people can express themselves in that way.
In China, family and children take on added significance. The young are expected to eventually take care of their elders. All men, gay or straight, are expected to continue the family line. And Ouyang says that at some point, he too will return to the closet.
China is a traditional country, and all my family wants is for me to get married. So I suspect that I will have to get married after I turn 30. This is a dilemma all Chinese gay men face, and eventually most of us follow tradition.
It is as though coming out of the closet in China is only a temporary stage of development, a passing phase. Everything we've been talking about here would still come as a massive shock to most Chinese, especially among people in the countryside, and that's a vast majority. Traditional values prevail. Sex of any kind remains a very private matter. But migrant workers, the men and women who are flocking to China's cities by the millions, are for the most part young people. Young and single, or young and separated from their families for long periods. As in many places around the world, the fact that they are also poor simply means that there is a huge demand for cheap sex.
You can see some coming up.
My colleague Nick Mackey, who lives in Chongqing, drove us through the low-end red light district. It may have existed before, but now these storefront brothels are all out in the open. We saw a whole bunch of police walking not far from here, right? It's quite obvious what these places are. It's against the law, but it goes on.
Absolutely, and it does beg the question: are these places paying some form of protection money to the local police to actually stay in operation? Prostitution is illegal, and these shops are fronts for prostitution.
A product to suit every pocketbook. There's more available than just a sing-along at Chongqing's karaoke clubs. The more money a customer's got, the more options he'll have to spend it. The Chinese are caught between the glittering promise of the future and the comfortable patterns of the past. For a few days every year during the Lunar New Year's holiday, the past reestablishes its hold. Tradition prevails throughout China. Those who are not home, go home. By the hundreds of thousands, they flood Chongqing's train and bus stations and head for the villages where they were born and where their ancestors are buried. The young girl there, that's Li Dan. She's home from boarding school, walking up into the hills of her home village, Dragon Spring, with her mother and father to visit the grave of her maternal grandmother. Fireworks to frighten away evil spirits. Tradition. The mother, Jin Gonglu, had told me last fall that she was fed up with her husband, that she would leave him right after the new year and find a job in the city. Her daughter, Li Dan, was horrified, warned her mother that she would leave school if that happened.
My aunt says people in the city look down on us villagers, and I worry about the type of work there.
Jin Gonglu says there was never any love between her and her husband. His family treated her horribly, and he's often drunk.
When Li Dan was born, her father and his family were not pleased. They hoped to have a boy. My mother-in-law did not want us to stay at her home because I gave birth to a daughter, so we were thrown out. That's typical of the older generation.
But the biggest issue between them was over spending the money to send Li Dan, a girl, to boarding school. Jin Gonglu will endure almost anything to keep her child in school. She will even stay in Dragon Spring. Indeed, she has found a second job, working for a local caterer, preparing banquets for wedding celebrations like this one. The extra money will help pay the tuition. The caterer wanted no part of her husband. He drinks too much. He works well enough for an hour or two, but then, eventually, he passes out. Jin Gonglu keeps on working. Her husband keeps on drinking. It's far from universal in China, but under the old ways, this kind of thing happened all too often. But tradition is changing all over China. That is exactly what Jin Gonglu's sacrifice is intended to achieve for Li Dan, a complete break with precisely that kind of tradition. Without such a head start, though, a young woman's options in the city are limited. What are these girls going to do? Young girls, Li Dan's age, also from outside the big city. They're nice girls. They come from good families. They could work on an assembly line. Perhaps they'd earn $20 or $25 a week. But they want to make a lot of money. And all they've got is their youth and their good looks. And so they come to work in a place like this, where some of the girls can earn $20 in an evening. It's a karaoke bar. They tend to run the gamut from gaudy to tacky to sleazy. This is one of the better ones, somewhere between gaudy and tacky. Jackie Lee is only 25 years old, but he's the manager of this KTV club.
This is a business club. Lots of businessmen come here. They negotiate, and many agreements are even reached here.
That's true. All kinds of agreements are reached in places like this, between businessmen or with a cop or local official whose help on one project or another may be useful. Many wheels are greased at karaoke clubs. There's a lot of drinking and singing, but at the center of it all are the young women.
What I see as the girls' job is to cheer everybody up. They can sing well. They can drink a lot. And they are very good at improving the mood in the room. Because everyone comes here for fun.
There's a boisterous public area where the customers sit and ogle the young women. but the reason the girls wear numbers is to advertise their availability and to encourage the customers to rent a hostess for the evening. Some of these karaoke clubs are just thinly disguised brothels. This place, says Jackie Lee, is not. The first thing we do, he says, is spell out what the job involves.
The second point we tell our girls, our company's principle is, treat our customers as God. So we must provide good service.
Off the main floor, corridor after corridor of private rooms. Field producer Zhang Yongning takes me to VIP room 888.
888, luckiest number of all.
And here, too, the girls parade in until the customer finds what he's looking for. Most of them look terribly young and vulnerable. And they are.
我叫李彤，今年18。
赵娇，17。
我叫白银，19岁。
周玉洁，18岁。
Do you recognize them? 3 of them, and they come from the same town, are the girls you first met when they were shopping. They admit that it's a thin line in a place like this between entertaining a customer and entertaining a customer.
Some customers will always try to grope us.
Do you think when they come here, they expect that maybe some of you will go home with them?
Yes, definitely.
No girl from this club, they were quick to add, though, would go home with a client. In some karaoke bars, the girls go home with the customers, right?
There are many, but I want to do what is right.
So, now that you think about it, was this a good idea? Leaving your hometown and coming here?
It's worth it. No, I should be in school. At the end of the year, I will go home and go into the clothing business.
Which is exactly what she did. Bai Yin went home to the town of Tongliang and is now working in a local clothing shop.
Working in a club like that, it's very hard to remain respectable. So it's probably better just not to be there.
Her father has no idea that she worked as a hostess in Chongqing. Her mother clearly suspects something and is adamant that her daughter will not be returning to the city.
We just want our family to be safe and to live a simple life. We want to keep to ourselves because it's hard to tell who is good and who is bad.
This little town is famous throughout China. This is where the fire dragon dance was born about 2,200 years ago. They perform it annually for the Lunar New Year. It's quite a tradition. But tradition is about honoring the past. The question is how a young person without an education can build a future. Well, why not? The Great Wall is an extended, essentially endless fashion runway. Designer Karl Lagerfeld considers the setting enchanting and entirely logical.
It's built to be a runway, you know, they don't have to fight against the Mongolians anymore.
It is certainly where LVMH, owner of Fendi, Tag Heuer, Louis Vuitton, Dom Perignon, the biggest luxury goods group in the world, wants to be. China. This enormous potential marketplace for all things Western. 40% of LVMH's world sales are generated in Asia. And right now, what defines luxury in China is an expensive import. Quality, creativity, and innovation are not seen as originating in China. Please note, the designer and many of the models and celebrities have been imported. China's wealthy have a thing for all things foreign, and more to the point, they'll pay for it. Fashion design, urban design. Someday, no doubt, the Chinese will appreciate their own creations. For the moment, though, they place a higher value on anything produced by foreigners.
This is your baby, right?
Yeah, I took a major role. This project's in excess of 30 million square feet, which is probably bigger than all but 3 or 4 dozen American cities. It cost in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 billion US, which in China's means more because the dollar goes a lot further here.
Ben Wood is an American architect employed by the billionaire developer Vincent Lo. He directs a staff that is primarily Chinese.
American architects, because of their status of pretty much dominating the economy for so long, we've been to places that China's on the way to becoming. And so when we design a 5-star hotel or a luxury resort in the southern Himalayas, we have been to a luxury resort in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We've not only been there, we've stayed there. We've experienced it. If I tell my staff we're now going to design a boutique hotel in Lhasa, and it's going to attract the rich and famous, they have no idea where to start. Because they've never been to one, they've never met a rich and famous person. They're just as smart, just as bright, just as well trained, but they don't have the life experience that translates into design.
Chun Jing is college educated with a master's degree in filmmaking. Ever since he spent his junior year of high school as an exchange student in Washington State, he goes by the name Alan. He may be Chongqing's most artistic fashion photographer, but that's an observation Alan would consider damning with faint praise.
You said to me, this is a cultural desert.
Yeah.
Chongqing.
Yeah.
Why?
Because everything is developing. And the focus now here is in economic development.
Everything is about making money.
Yeah. And that's what I feel.
Indeed, Alan is producing provocative ads to do just that, make money for his clients and himself. But he doesn't consider his work genuinely creative.
Sometimes I just feel my imagination, my minds are blocked. And I feel it's very terrible. My mind is empty. I could not creative anything.
Why do you think that is so? Why do you think there is more creativity in the West than here in China?
I think it's a result of the Chinese education. Because the Chinese education does not encourage students to creative or imagine. They just tell you 1 is 1, 2 is 2, and don't forget it. 1 and 1 is 2. Yeah, so no imagination.
Vincent Lo is one of the biggest investors in Chongqing. The system that Alan perceives as stifling creativity, Lo sees as providing the stability essential for economic development.
I believe the political system for China at this point in time is very effective for the country.
I have always been told that what Chinese governments fear the most is chaos.
I'm sure that that's something we are all concerned about too. It's not just the government. If this is very chaotic, I don't think I'll be investing billions of dollars into the city. We need stability in order that we can do business.
Stability tolerates, even requires safety valves. Prostitution doesn't threaten China's political stability. Indeed, it allows young men to let off steam. A lot goes on inside those karaoke bars, but they are hardly hotbeds of political activism. Gay bars? Yes. Gay pride parades? Not on your life. And while it may not seem that religion belongs in that company, in China it too can be illegal but tolerated. Alan Chun recently converted to Christianity. As part of his search for moral values, Alan now meets every Tuesday night with a Bible study group.
What did you find in religion that you didn't have before?
The purpose of life.
And that purpose is what?
The purpose is connect my own life with God's wish. I think it's very important. I was thinking about to achieve my dream, driving a new car, bigger car, expensive car, living in a bigger house. But now I feel my purpose of life must be connected to the purpose of God. Why He made me. I need to connect myself with my God.
And that kind of God, a personal, comforting, apolitical, non-interfering kind of God, is perfectly in keeping with the goals and aspirations of the Chinese government. The Roman Catholic Church, for example, remains officially illegal, but Rome and Beijing seem to be moving toward accommodation, and Catholics these days are rarely persecuted by the government. The government does not tolerate the spiritual practices of Falun Gong. At its peak, 70 million members strong. There was a silent protest in 1999. 10,000 Falun Gong gathered in front of party headquarters in Beijing. That scared the government, and Falun Gong has been out of bounds ever since.
It's okay for you to become a Christian.
Yeah.
That's no problem.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to join Falun Gong,
oh, no.
That would be a big problem.
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Because the government said it's bad.
I understand.
And we are citizens. It's responsibility to follow the government's orders. And I think the government's order should be respected. There must be a reason for them to do it. I believe in my government, yeah.
Which is also a form of faith, blind faith. Things in China are getting better, therefore, what the government is doing must be right. There they were one morning, looking very determined and very much alone in front of Chongqing's Court of Appeals building. What was unclear is just what they were protesting. What was absolutely clear is that they weren't going to move on their own until somebody inside agreed to listen to their complaint. There are, according to the Chinese government's own statistics, tens of thousands of protests and demonstrations every year reflecting public unhappiness. But how do you measure happiness in China? Imperfectly, which is to say, by taking a poll. This group of roving Gallup pollsters has traveled across China collecting Chinese opinions. The Gallup organization has been sampling public opinion in China since 1994 and is limited by the government to asking market research questions, determining what the Chinese consumer wants. For this particular survey, researchers conducted about 3,000 face-to-face interviews. Respondents were asked to rank their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10. Su Zhe, a school teacher, ranked hers at 6.
The Chinese economy is growing very fast, and people are able to own property. I think this is a good thing. It's bringing us closer to Western standards. I hope my child will get a good education.
People seem so focused on making money now and providing a better life for their children down the road that there's almost no discussion of the freedoms they don't have.
The majority of the consumers in this market
are happy with the status quo of their life. You know, I think compared to what happened 5 years ago, I think now they have more ownership of consumer products.
Wu Tao is the director of research for Gallup in China.
But I think people are also more hopeful about what's going to be happening in their lives. So generally, if you think about the consumers, if you look at the data, I think they're quite upbeat about the future. They're quite optimistic about the future.
Optimism extends to the poorest in society. Gallup asks people to compare their lives 5 years ago to what they expect 5 years from now. Among 143 nations polled, only a handful of countries can match China's huge leap in optimism. Even Alan Chun, the fashion photographer who's desperately searching for creativity and innovation, doesn't understand how dissent and political freedom might play a useful role.
Because when I say to you, is it possible to have different ideas in China about how things should be done politically? You say to me, no, I love my country, I love the government is doing everything to help the country, so it's not up to me to be creative in that area. Do you see the connection? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I noticed just now you said, Alan, you said you love your country, you love your government, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but I noticed one word you use is love. I have to say that I love my country, but I don't love my government. I trust my government.
Interesting point.
I think it's different.
Vincent Lo agrees.
I have studied and lived in Western world, but unfortunately, democracy, of course, it sounds good, but in practice, it doesn't always bring you the results. And a lot of criticism have been put on China, saying that this is a one-party system, human rights and everything else, but this is a system that has helped China come to where it is in such a short time, in that past 30 years.
Nor will you get much argument out of Lo's American architect, Ben Wood.
He and I both agree that the best way to solve those problems is not by rampant democracy. It's by controlled change informed by some very smart people over time. And with that in mind, I think over the next 20 years, a third of all new Chinese people will live in a place like this.
Now that's an American talking,
Yes.
sort of pissing on democracy.
No, I'm a former jet fighter pilot, loyal to the country. Not at all. I'm just saying I live with these people, so I can appreciate what it's going to take to get them from here to here.
If China is to adopt a Western-style democracy today, I don't think I would have so much confidence to invest all this money into China.
Why? What do you think the consequence would be?
Because I'm sure the development would be very different, and the focus will be very different. And I don't think I would be doing big projects like this in a city like Chongqing.
Because now you have stability, now you have confidence in what will happen 5 years from now.
We can see continuity. We can see a very clear objective and goal for the government to pursue and for us as business people to pursue. And we can work hand in hand for the good of the place.
Vincent Lo worries that political freedom might actually lead to economic instability. Alan Chun has never known political freedom and is quite prepared to accept the government's assurance that he doesn't need it.
My question is, if people want to get together, let's say in the countryside, and protest corruption, then the police will come and they will break up the demonstration and they will not allow it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you say, oh, really? You don't know that?
I don't know. I have never seen that.
I know you haven't seen it. You know why you haven't seen it?
Why?
Because television cannot report it.
Oh.
Because the newspapers cannot report it. Because anyone who is there, if they take a photograph, they will be arrested.
Okay.
That's why you don't know about it, right? I don't want to get you in trouble. I don't want to make you say something you don't want to say.
No,
but,
it's fine.
But you don't seem to care about that.
Yeah.
You don't.
Not very care about that part. I don't. Yeah.
Because?
There must be a reason for government to do that. And I really believe in Chinese government because we can see that people here live in a better life than before. And I don't think the people who wrote something and on the street or sitting on the street are smart. They are not smart. I don't think it's a best way to do that. For me, I won't. I don't think it's smart.
Which brings us back to that couple on the courthouse steps. The fact that they were treated courteously, even gently, certainly owed something to the fact that our foreign camera crew happened to be on the scene. But that's precisely the point. A few years ago, our cameraman would have been arrested, and the tape would have been confiscated. Some things change slowly in China, but they are changing. What was the protest about? When we contacted the Justice Ministry, no one would say. Indeed, no one would acknowledge that it even happened. Nothing so epitomizes China's hunger for all things Western as its ravenous appetite for the foreign car. So, if the Chinese could have any car in the world, you know what many, if not most of them, would choose? An American car, a Buick, a black Buick.
The Buick popular cars in Chongqing, and they like black cars because that represents elegance and status.
Over the last year, General Motors sold more Buicks in China than in the United States. This won't do much for morale in Dearborn or Detroit, but GM and Ford can barely keep up with the demand in China. Nor is this likely to make American auto workers feel any better. As soon as they work out their safety and emissions problems, the Chinese will begin exporting their cars to the United States. We'll tell you all about it on our next program.